I want to ask you a little bit about actions moving forward and things we can all be doing to be anti-racist on a daily basis. And one of the current issues right now that we're seeing a lot of debate on is around critical race theory in schools. And we have some states banning it, and there's a lot of parent-teacher groups debating bringing CRT into the educational system. And I'm wondering, like, your advice on how to approach those conversations because they can get so heated. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of myths out there. Um, your advice on how do we begin to have more empathy for each other, and how do we have a conversation without trying to get
I
too
think it
triggered
depends on if you're
emotionally.
having a personal conversation or a public conversation. But I think that it's important, to remember that the anti-CRT movement is a very well-funded movement that is a political movement designed to sow conflict in local communities in order to have more conservative wins in the election cycle that's coming up. So there's a great report from UCLA called The Conflict Campaign that kind of describes the funding that has gone into this and the ways in which it has been structured. So it's a very strategic campaign because it essentially plays on the very fears we've been talking about. The fact that when people are like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about race, or yeah, I hate that conversation too. So great. Like there's an anti-CRT thing. I'll kind of get behind that, or I won't speak up against it because I'm glad, talking about race is scary to me. But that's not fundamentally, that's not what this is about. It's a wedge issue. It's about voting and it's about power. And I think that one of the things the African American Policy Forum really recommends is that we talk about what we stand for, because the anti-CRT movement is about a couple talking points. So if you go to any of the school board meetings, or if you read about some of the places where there's an anti-CRT sentiment, there's some very clear talking points that show up. And what I think we need to do for people who think it's actually important for us to talk about race, because if we don't, we can't talk about racism. And because it's a part of our history, is to say, like, what do you believe? And we don't need complex talking points. It's like, I am pro-truth. I am pro-truth. I want to hear the realities of the complex human beings around me. That includes people of color, Native people, trans folks, gay and lesbian folks, women. I want to hear about their realities and how to build a society that's big enough for all of us, because at the end of the day, there is enough for all of us to be a part of it. I want to talk about, I'm pro-unity. I'm pro-unity. I'm pro-community. I'm pro-history. I want to hear it's funny because we talk about how people think like history, we're changing history. It's like with this modern rendition of history that includes all the stories from people of color. And if that doesn't align with what you learned, then it must be wrong. And I think about taking my kid to the zoo, and there's this special exhibit on dinosaurs. And I'm looking at these dinosaurs. I'm like, I did not learn. I grew up in Pittsburgh with the Carnegie Museum. I've never heard of any of these things. Like, the dinosaurs have feathers. There's 30-foot birds. I mean, I never, what we know about dinosaurs is so different from what I knew in the 80s.
Right.
Like, this is, because our knowledge changes and we know different things about history now. I'm pro-history. I want to hear those stories, the things that we now know about history that we didn't know before. And so what I really encourage people to do is like, for white people in particular, like, we're really good at being bystanders. If you look at our history of the civil rights movement, it wasn't only people of color. It was not only Black people in the civil rights movement. There were some white people, there were some people of color who were not Black in that movement. But by and large, white people were mostly looking on. I mean, if we weren't actively perpetuating the racism of Jim Crow, we were looking on. And so what we want to say is, like, try everything. I think about that Shakira song from Zootopia. Try everything. Go to the meeting. Speak up. Say what it is you're about. And that's all it has to be. It doesn't even have to be contradictory. This is what I stand for. And if you're one-on-one in a conversation with people who are anti-CRT, listen to them. What is it they're afraid of? What are they struggling with? What is it they want? Because the chances are good that you want it too. We have to remember that the anti-CRT movement is about sowing local conflict. So when we just dive into the local conflict, in some ways, we're playing into the strategy that, that we will fight each other. So if I can listen to you, affirm your fears, hear your fears, talk about what I'm about, and let you know that, like, I fundamentally want to be in community with you, want to build community with you that's going to be safe enough and big enough for all of us, then I'm working against the campaign. So try everything, say what you're about, take the risk that you might be wrong, and then open yourself up to the feedback. So Mike, tell me, what did I get wrong? Trusted colleagues of color, Native colleagues, what did I get wrong? And I'm not going to get crushed by your feedback. I'm going to take it in, and I'm going to do better next time. But if we don't create that draft, if we don't take that first step, then we don't even have anything to get feedback on. And so that's like, we're not going to do it perfectly. We know we're not going to do it perfectly. It would be better if we could. But since we can't, we got to just kind of take that first step, take in the feedback, keep growing, and keep moving together. And then when we're down and out and I'm like so sad and demoralized and frustrated, I'm going to call Mike. I'm going to call Eleonora. I'm going to say, listen, I'm feeling really frustrated. I'm getting it all wrong. Help me out here. And then I'm going to feel better in a couple of days. And what I've done there is I've navigated racial stress. I've navigated political stress, which is all inevitable. And I'm still standing.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Delgado Podcast. As always, you can get the show notes, video links, and resources mentioned in this episode on my blog at mikedelgado.org. You can also get updates to new shows and get access to the full archive of past shows by following the Delgado Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you ever have suggestions for future topics or guests you want to hear from on this show, please reach out. My email is delgado@ucla.edu. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll chat more next time.